only because when I give these talks, the game has already been released. But we released in December, so this is a little bit early. But we got the opportunity to come out, and I got the opportunity to represent the team. So I'm really honored to be here. Yesterday, I got to meet some people in the conference, and honestly humbled by the level of experience out here. So really happy to be here. Some of you, a lot of you may not know what the Callisto Protocol is, and it's a survival sci-fi horror game. And what I wanted to do is give you guys some context of what it is. So I was going to show you the trailer just so you know what I'm talking about. And can you hit the lights?
Take a look outside. Did you know that they call Callisto the dead moon? Dead. Just like you would have been if I hadn't fished you out of that wreck. So whatever you're holding on to right there, that's your old life. You gotta let that go. Because your new life is entirely in my hands. I'm just trying to give you a chance at rebirth. I just love that last part. Gives me chills every time. Your new home.
Thank you. Pre-order! I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Demetrius Leal. I'm the art director at Striking Distance Studios. The studio was established by Glenn Schofield. He got the opportunity to establish it about 3 years ago for Craft. And before that, I got the opportunity to work with Glenn at Activision and at a studio called Sledgehammer Games there. We worked on the Call of Duty series in reverse order, working on World War II, Advanced Warfare, and then MW3. And I was a technical art director there. Before that, I was working with Glenn, and I met Glenn over at Electronic Arts. And there I met a group of like-minded people who shared passion for creating high-quality games. And we've kind of stuck together ever since. And I met Glenn working on a little game called Dead Space. Another sci-fi horror game that you guys might be familiar with. When Glenn started this new studio, he had three things in mind. He wanted to create a AAA studio, a AAA team, and then a AAA sci-fi horror game, and wanted to do this in 3 years. So it was a little scary, a little daunting. And the first question that came up was, well, what is horror? And the standard definition, it's a dictionary definition, an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust. It's a good one, yeah? But what does that mean in the context of a game, right? How does the player get there? What's their motivation? What's the setting? And how do we get there? And what I mean is not how does the player get there, how do we get there as a team? It had been many years since we worked on Dead Space, and we needed to relearn what we did because it had been a long time. Our muscles had kind of atrophied. Fortunately, we had help from Glenn. Now, he's had decades of experience. He lives and breathes horror games and just horror media. Like, he just watches stuff that I can't believe. And I share that. I mean, I love to make games. I really do. I mean, I don't know what else I would do at this point. Beyond that, I love making sci-fi games and even more specifically, sci-fi horror games. I mean, I really do like it a lot. Or I'll just say, yeah, love it. So Glenn gave us an initial principle. And I remember talking to him initially about workflows and pipelines and stuff like that. And what he said was that horror, it needs to be handcrafted. It needs to be bespoke. And we really needed to learn how to create these elements. And then we could worry about pipeline and workflow. So that's what we did. And finally, he gave us horror pillars. And I can't really remember them off the top of my head, so let me use my crib note here. Atmosphere. So we needed to set a plate for the horror itself. We needed to give a setting of desolation. We needed to establish tension. We needed to put the player in jeopardy. We knew they wanted to get from point A to point B, so we needed to put obstacles in front of them. Brutality. There's been a trend, especially in Western media, to just have the most brutal horror out there. So we wanted to leverage that as well. Humanity, and this is a really important one because we wanted to establish a connection with our characters and even our creatures too. And finally, helplessness. And with helplessness, we wanted to give tools to the player, but not make it easy for them. We wanted to make it a challenge for sure. So we started with blue sky concepts. We knew that Glenn had an overall vision, and we knew it wanted to be in a prison on a prison planet. So we used this concept to rally the team and get them understanding what it was we were going to make. And let me back up for a second because what I wanted to get across in this talk was hopefully you guys I can present an understanding of how art and concept can help rapidly prototype stuff and make things more efficient and how we used it to solve for horror. But back to this. So we use this ideation to rally the team, and we knew we wanted visceral combat. We knew we wanted it in your face. We wanted to see the flesh rip, and we wanted to hear the audio of the bone crunching. And then we also wanted to give the players a level of progression through the game. So we wanted to give them different environments where they can encounter those different enemies. Glenn gave us his horror pillars, and beyond that, for every subdiscipline, we had horrors pillars that we wanted to extrapolate as well. So for this game, horror is a mechanic. We knew that's why people wanted to buy the game. So that mapped directly back to those pillars that Glenn gave us. Beyond that, this one is in support of immersion. And we wanted to make the game as realistic as possible to give a realistic horror experience. Personally, I wanted to remove the screen between the player and the game itself to make it as perceptual as possible. I didn't want players to feel like they were playing a photograph. And then the design part, that was important because we wanted to make the gameplay fun. So if design needed to do something, we would shift the realism for that. And then finally, relatability. And our game takes place in the future. And there was going to be lots of crazy design elements, but we didn't want to distract from the horror itself. So if we needed the player to understand the tools that they were going to use, and they needed to understand where they were. So if they were going to go in a kitchen, even though it's a futuristic kitchen, they should understand it's a kitchen. And I'm done. Oh, that's weird. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. Oh, that was weird. Okay. Okay, so we started to do research, and we looked at media out there, games and film. We wanted to understand what we could glean from every other elements out there, and other people who were doing horror. And we selected like a selection in games and films that we thought were kind of aligned with what we were doing. And we went pretty deep. We took screen grabs, screenshots. We wanted to understand exactly what they were doing. We were very methodical about it. One thing you may not notice on this list is Dead Space. And we did it on purpose. Dead Space, it was wonderful working on it. We poured our hearts and souls into it. We wanted this experience to be evolved. We wanted it to stand on its own and be unique. So that way, we kind of had to start over. So we started looking at what we could glean and what were similarities. So starting with the monsters, we knew we wanted them to be animalistic. We didn't want them to be intelligent. They wanted them to be close to humans. So we were looking for that kind of fleshy monster and something that was deranged, that you couldn't reason with. And then a relatable protagonist. We wanted to establish that empathy with our protagonist. So we wanted to establish commonality. These are people that find themselves in danger. They're not the first person to jump into it. They're like, they have jobs like you or I. And finally, combat. We wanted to give the user tools to fight the monsters, and that's the primary purpose of the game. So we weren't looking to run away from the monsters. It wasn't like a total stealth game or that type of genre. Oh, so with this, we found that we're closest to Carpenter's The Thing, and Ridley Scott's The Alien. Now, going back to realism, fortunately, we had a great partner, the art side, and we had a great collaboration with our rendering team, headed up by this gentleman right here. His name is Jorge Jimenez, and super inspiring to work with. He's the inventor of the 5S technique, separable screen space subsurface scattering. Say that 5 times quickly. And so he's an industry leader, so I love this guy, and we both worked on Call of Duty together. And with this game, I realized that PBR materials were going to be incredibly important for realism. You wanted the response out there, but I also knew we were going to have lots of interiors with lots of point lights, and new lighting was going to be pivotal. So we embarked on an examination of how we could do this. And I'm going to do a quick plug for Jorge. He's the head of our Spanish studio in Zaragoza, and he's hiring. So if you want to work with him, check out our website, or you can hit me up after. So in this, we were methodical as well. So, and this is the after picture, by the way. It's not the before picture. So we compared photographs to our CG. And when we did this initially, we found that there were differences in shading. There were, especially the shadows. There was missing information, or it was a bit different. So we really honed in on that sort of stuff. And we came out with some takeaways. And the first one being, we really wanted high quality light maps for our environment. We were going to be a really dark game, so we needed the ambience to be correct. The second thing was ray trace shadows. Now, this is where we diverged from Unreal. Unreal was going towards Lumen and Nanite, awesome technologies, but we were going to branch right here, so we were taking a gamble. And then finally, ray tracer reflections. Yes, this would be awesome to have. but wasn't necessarily critical for the game. So going to our characters, with these we wanted to establish our empathy and our tension. We wanted to establish a commonality. We wanted to give the player something to lose. In addition, they were really important to convey the story. So with our main protagonist, Jacob, we made him a pilot. And when we were designing him, we initially gave him more of a militaristic look, but that was too far away from what we wanted. So we made him we made him a trucker in space, essentially. So just kind of gave him a regular job and made him a regular guy. And here he is in the ship. And we wanted to give him those individualistic motivations. Once again, he's not going to be rushing into danger. He wants to earn money. He wants to pay his rent. So we would understand him. And here he is in game here. To further establish that anxiety, what we want to do is concentrate on those visual cues. So we concentrated on making the sweat realistic on him and the grime on his suit realistic as well, just because he was going to be crawling all over the place and we wanted him to feel grounded as well. And our character department spent a huge amount of time on the suit itself, every detail. Once again, trying to make it as immersive as possible. And they went so far as to create a system to make it responsive to the environment. So if it's snowing outside, it would actually accumulate snow on the suit. So for our narrative, it was really, really important to establish that story. And one of the ideas that was thrown out there was to give Jacob a companion. And this was going to be a risk for horror because we wanted to isolate the player. And so we took a risk. We decided that it was worth it to convey parts of the story that were going to be hard otherwise. And we were fortunate enough to have Karen Fukuhara from The Boys join the cast. And she plays Danny. And her character is in odds or at odds with Jacob, whereas Jacob, he's not going to be a hero. Well, Danny, she has a mission. She has resolve. She's in complete or a little bit of conflict with Jacob himself. And beyond that, she's very technical. So we wanted to add that to the design cues. And so while they're both escaping the prison, Jacob, he's going to use his brute force. But Danny, I mean, she's going to use her skills to actively escape. And when we were designing the costumes for the characters, we knew that we wanted the expressions to shine through. So every aspect, we wanted to make sure that we could highlight those faces. And so here you can see the defiance on Danny. So we've established empathy with our characters. So now we wanted to set the table and set a stage for our horror. So we're going to create a world that creates that desolation and isolation. So our game takes place 300 years in the future. And man has left Earth and has started colonizing the solar system. And one of the main drivers, one of the main reasons they do that is for exploitation of minerals in space mining. And one of the main drivers of that are corporations. And our corporation is the UJC, United Jupiter Company. We wanted to make a huge, faceless corporation, neither good or evil, and in there for profit. And they're one of the reasons we find ourselves where we are. Because they built the Black Iron Prison. And we chose a prison as a setting for our game because we couldn't think of anything or any place more horrible. I mean, the prison, everything there is made to oppress people and punish them for doing some kind of wrongdoing. And when we were designing the game, we wanted to leverage that language, those visual languages. And when we were coming up with these visual languages, we did it in terms of scale. We did it in macro scale and micro scale because we had vistas and we had up close. So let me talk about some of our influences on the macro scale. And one of our first influences was brutalism. It came out in the 1950s in the UK, and this example is the Giesel Library in California, UCSD, San Diego, to be specific. And you can see what characterizes it is those large jutting shapes and the heavy materials that are made to use it, like concrete. And a more recent offshoot is bowalism. And here you see the Lloyd's of London building. And bowalism is exactly what it sounds like. It's actually taking the innards of a building and exposing it to the environment. And it's an anthropomorphic architectural style here too. So you can see the stairwell down the center. It actually looks like a spine. And then you have a skeletal framework that's coming through, and then the pipes running down. And our last influence architecturally was German Romanesque, a style around the 10th century, and characterized by primitive building shapes. You had angular buttresses and squared off columns and rounded arches. So we took all those styles and we put them together. So here you have an example of our hangar, and you see the large jutting shapes of the brutalism on top. You see the exposed framework of the bowalism in the midsection, and then you see the German Romanesque buttresses on the bottom, which is very useful because then it served as a landmark for our player as they were traversing the game. And as they got up close, made for an impressive building and shape. So Nervi gave us another idea. And what they found was a reference of a prison in Cuba, now abandoned, and it's called a panopticon. And the thing that was interesting about this was that every cell could look out, and their view was of the central guard tower in the center. So we took that idea, and we once again put our languages on that. So here, once again, you see the buttresses from German Romanesque. You have the skeletal framework of bowalism on the top, and then you have those jutting shapes of brutalism on the central spire. And here it is in game. And once again, very useful because that central spire is a waypoint. You know, the character can, or actually the player can always know where they're going. And the unfortunate thing is this is horrible to render because you could see everything at the same time. So that's a different presentation. Now, switching to microscale. As we get close, what we chose was generative design. And the thing that we loved about it, and me especially, was that it had this skeletal shape. It almost looked like tree branches coming out. And it had kind of an evolving quality to it. And that's what we wanted to express in our creatures too. We wanted them to be mutants and evolving. So it was a good parallel. And what it is it's an AI algorithm. And it takes man-made shapes and it converts it to something that looks very alien. What it does is it optimizes for efficiency and strength. And the way it does this is through iteration, through evolution. And it goes through hundreds of thousands of steps to do this. And even that was a perfect parallel to our creature too. And so it was a perfect language for having it in the game. And the other thing that was great about it was that it was kind of additive on our simple shapes. So it provided a visual complexity to the game. It added chaos, which we wanted. The thing that we had to be careful, though, is that we didn't want to add too much chaos. So we made up a rule. We used only up to 30% of it in the game itself. And here our concept team puts it on a bulkhead door. And it was also very useful because it mirrored the language of a prison. It looks like bars. It looks structural. It looks like it's strengthening things. And here you see it in game. Fortunately, we have a dark game, so that worry of visual complexity wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. So it kind of pushed back to the background, but it gave our game a unique style. And once you see it once, you're going to see it all over the place. So we created the style for our environment. Now we wanted to bring some more desolation to it, some more ruin. And what better in a prison but a prison riot? So the problem we initially ran into is where we start off always is research. And well, we couldn't really go to a prison that was working to actually do our research. So we looked at first-hand accounts, documentaries, media out there, and we absorbed it all. And I remember one thing that struck me that was really moving to me was that there was a prisoner, and he described being intaked into a prison. And one of the first things he saw was stenciled on the wall, "No warning shots fired," with some bullet holes right next to it. I was like, oh, let's take that. Let's put it in the game. So we took it and other elements just like that to give it just a little bit of believability. And we took those visual cues and then updated our environment. So when the player is traversing, they knew immediately that something was wrong. Now, our setting is on Callisto, and scientists theorize that underneath its crust is a 100-kilometer deep ocean. So we also wanted to communicate that to the player. So we brought that wetness into the environment. We made it wet, we made it glossy. And then we also wanted to remind them that they were on a moon, that they were on a planetoid and not on a ship. So we brought that rock in as well. So we've set a stage with our environment. So now we're going to move on to the lighting. We wanted to further isolate the player. And this was tricky because we are a dark game, designed less to see things. So, and in addition, for our combat metric, our hallways were 4 meters wide, which is pretty wide. So it was going to be hard for us to create that isolation and that claustrophobia. So we started leaning into darkness. And with the darkness, we could reduce the available reaction time for the player. And we could play with silhouettes and give false positives. And then we could limit the information. So if they were under attack, we could limit which way that we would present options for escape, essentially. So all this to induce anxiety in the player themselves as they're going through the game. In addition, we were using the lighting to create that natural vignette. And even though we had these really wide hallways, it actually worked to bring in the space and make it claustrophobic. So we used several lighting techniques in the game itself, and this one right here is called skip lighting. It's a highly directional technique, and it's kind of counterintuitive in that you're pointing a light directly at the player. And fortunately, we had these really complex shapes in our geometry, but when you point the light that way, it creates these long raking shadows, and so brings in the darkness that way. When we wanted the player to explore, we used more pooling of lights. So we kept the lights where the player needed to go and explore, but still use the darkness to bring that in. And then we also did lighting gags. And this was one of my favorite ones where we're at the top of a stairwell, and we tell the player where to go in spray paint right up in the shoulder right there. But we purposely made where they were supposed to go dark. So we were wanting the player to go into darkness. We use gags like that all the time. And I love that stuff. I mean, it makes me happy. Sorry. And then, of course, we use it for landmarking and telling the player which way to go. So with our characters, emotion was critical to our game to establish that empathy. So we leaned on noir. And Ridley Scott did it in Alien. And when he did it, it actually became a new genre called sci-fi noir. And Carpenter did it too. He did it, it was softer, but it was still there. Actually, I prefer the softer look. So in my research, and I could be wrong, it was a technique that came out of the 40s and was actually a happy accident. It was a mistake, the result of incorrect lighting, and became a genre from that. But our lighters took it and they used it to emphasize emotion in our characters. And not only did they play with shadow, but they played with hue. to express that duality and that conflict in our characters as well. Something else that we did, we worked with our lighters in our costume design, and we worked with them to actually put the lights in the helmet themselves. So we could use that noir throughout the game. And they used it to express anxiety and danger. So in this, we were methodical as well. We examined different examples of noir. We classified it in emotion, and we gave it to the team so they could apply it and execute. Now on to the creatures. All right, I'm gonna have to look at my notes for this one. So with the biophage, we chose that name on purpose. Biophage means any organism that derives its nourishment from another living organism. And with our creatures, we wanted them to be, like I said, more animalistic, neither good nor evil. They're just there, and we're there as well at the wrong place at the wrong time. And as I mentioned before, Callisto is an aquatic planet. So we initially started with making the creatures aquatic-based. But we found that it was too far from human, too far from establishing the empathy. So we wanted to go the opposite spectrum. And our concept artists came up with more bipedal designs. And here you see this, or these examples. And the thing that we found with these is that they felt too intelligent. They felt like demons, right? We wanted our creatures to be something that couldn't be reasoned with. So what we really wanted was, and I mentioned this before, was establish a connection with it. We wanted people to feel the pain of that transformation of these creatures. And we wanted to see it. And here's another example, and I love this example from Carpenter. And here you can see those frozen screams of the victims, and you see that pulled flesh and the glistening blood. We wanted all of this in our creatures as well. And so our lead concept designer came up with this reference. This is called a bloodworm, and it uses proboscis to find its prey. The thing that we loved about it is that it was liquid, but still structural at the same time. It had this, once again, this tree branching quality to it. It felt evolving. Once again, a visual language that we could use to mirror in our creatures. And we gave it the highly technical name of worm barf. And so that's what we used throughout the game. And so once we had that style, we could establish a style for our environment and creatures and the biophage and started rolling it out. Too far away. Okay, and then this is where we landed with our creatures themselves. You can see that pulled flesh, that pain that they're experiencing. You can see those pustules that erupting out of their skin as well. And we also wanted to make sure that they felt deranged. We wanted them up in your face, and we wanted you to panic when you're like, fighting these things. But also, we wanted to make sure that you could always identify the origin, that they were human. So we also wanted to explore how far we could push it, and we came up with creatures that were almost entirely composed of biophage. However, once again, we wanted to make sure there was always an element of humanity in there. And then we also wanted to explore absorption of different creatures and imply that it was happening itself. So here you can see one of our creatures with two heads in it, and some have one, some have two, some have three. And we wanted to apply that ecosystem where perhaps they were absorbing abilities or evolving. And this was actually a small thing that we shared with PUBG, which is survival of the fittest. So with our early creatures, we made them more humanoid. We wanted people to buy into the fiction, but as we progressed through the game, we wanted our creatures to have more abilities and be further away from human. Once again, always maintaining the humanity and making sure that they felt animalistic, neither good or evil. Just want us for food. And something that we had learned in Dead Space when with the necromorphs was that we had created huge varieties of necromorphs, but people only really noticed one or two of them. And so in this game, we wanted to make sure that we paid attention to silhouette. So for every creature variety, we wanted to make sure it was different. And we also use emissive to identify creatures. However, we found that it took away from the reality, so we only used it sparingly. Now, our designers came up with what we call sandbox mechanics, meaning that it was equal parts melee, arranged, and we also had a GRP, which is kind of a telekinetic kinetic device that you could use to lift your enemy and push him away. So it was very tactical that way. But of course, they want more. So we look towards, again, one of our inspirations. And you have this violent eruption of tentacles and pus and stuff, so gross. And we gave it to our concept artists. And the designers wanted to implement a resurrection mechanic. So in this one, we created a weak spot. And so if you didn't handle the creatures you killed in time, they'd come back and get you. And here you have an example of that KTV erupting out. Now, this wasn't enough, so the designers wanted more. And in this case, they put in another timer on it. So if you didn't take care of the weak spot, it would become this multi-staged effect and further mutate right in front of you. And so our concept artists came with this initial concept of our mutations. And if you didn't take care of it quickly enough, it was going to turn into this, and something bigger and badder. And once again, we wanted to put pressure on the player, create that anxiety. Now, on to brutality. So we were noticing that this was a trend, especially in Western media, so we wanted to take advantage and put that in the game as well. And once again, we wanted to see that ripping flesh, we wanted to hear the audio of the crunching bone. One of our main weapons in the game is this stun baton, and it's heavy and it has a really good follow through. So we wanted to lean into that. And one of the ways we did was to create this score system. The team did an excellent job. They made it fully featured and robust, so you could do blunt force trauma to ranged all the way to dismemberment. And they also implemented splash effects, and this was important for us for immersion. And as you go through combat, Jacob could get soaked in blood and would stay that way as he's going through the game. So we wanted you to experience or go through that journey with him as well. And then we also know or notice that people like seeing Jacob die. So for every major creature, we made sure that there were multiple deaths. So we had the GRP and we had our sandbox mechanics, and we wanted to make it even more tactical. So we started implementing environment. And here you see a wall fan that you can use the GRP or even melee to push the creatures into, and they jump and they explode into an explosion of blood and gore. And we also implemented wall spikes, and this is one of my personal favorites because I love impaling the enemies against the wall. But my personal favorite for art was the collaboration that we did with design. So they would come up with some crazy requirements, like I need to push it into the center of the room and be able to lift it into the sky and get jibs that way too. And it stressed me out. I mean, I was like, oh, how are we going to do this? But once again, research kind of saved us. So those rollers actually found an example of a wood chipper out there that had two of those giant rollers in there. I was like, oh, awesome. We could just put this into this giant machine, which we did. And then we thought, oh, it's a wood chipper. Sawdust in the air is going to be dangerous. So we need ventilation. So yes, perfect. A fan, we'll put that in there. And so we have all this stuff and we put it together, and then you get something like this. Oh, jeez. Terrible. Thanks. Oh, the blood rain. I love the blood rain. It's one of my favorite parts. So in conclusion, I hope I presented some examples where we've used art to solve for the complex problem of horror. We broke down horror into components, and we use our art pipeline to actually use visual design to solve for every one of those, at least our part. And then hopefully you got, well, I'm not sure if I did this either, but presented concept as actually a process for rapid prototyping to make game design when it's collaborative more efficient. And hopefully you can use your own art departments in that way as well. So with this, just touching upon each thing we did. So with our characters, we used our visual cues to establish that connection and that empathy, thus placing the player in jeopardy and establishing that tension that we needed. With the world, we created isolation and desolation, and that gave us our atmosphere for horror. With our lighting, we created that isolation. Once again, putting the player in, giving them the tension. With our gore and our visual effects, we brought in that brutality. And then with our creatures, we brought in brutality, anxiety, and well, yeah, that. And we took all these elements together, and when you put them together, that gives us our complete picture of horror. So in this talk, I've represented the work of many incredibly talented individuals. Hopefully you guys get to play the game when it comes out. And just know, as we're trying to kill you, it's out of love. So thank you very much. I guess questions? I could take some questions.
Quick question from me. Are you guys hiring? I know a lot of people want to know that, so I'm going to save people time.
You know, we always are looking for talented people. We always are looking for people who are curious. Yes, we do hire, and we will be hiring. And like I said, plug for Zaragoza. We're going to be growing that studio, so please look up Zaragoza in Spain. Yes.
You presented quite a bit of impressive technical art solutions to design problems, but the thing is, I know that you're releasing this also on last-gen consoles, on PS4, and how much of that has been has had to be scaled down? How was the optimization process for those systems?
Very important consoles. We want them to be as impressive as possible, and our teams are focused on it. So we hope that we deliver a comparable experience, for sure. So we want everybody to enjoy it on every platform.
Well, thank you so much, Demetrius, for the inspirational talk. My question is, you told us a lot of research. So the first question is, how long was this research phase for you? And then the question is, how did you broadcast this vision? Did you create like some sort of deck or maybe Confluence space or, I don't know, the pile of pictures? So how was it? Thanks.
Yeah, so this presentation is pretty high level for sure, and the research is continuous. So we'll go out there and we get an initial request, say from design. It's like, here, do X. And we really want to understand what X looks like in the context of the game, of art, and everything. So we'll be looking for inspiration and research. So, and it seems like it's never ending. Certainly in pre-production, there was a ton of it. And then we go into concept. Oh gosh, what was the second part of your question? I totally forgot. Oh, yes. So I didn't include that slide. I wanted to keep this presentation in time limit. So yes, Confluence created a huge art Bible. I don't know how many pages, hundreds of pages, I don't know. But we rolled that out to the team. In addition, which would be a separate presentation, we created art plans. And these were almost like packages per level, where we planned out the art specifically and including a lot of our mood pieces. And so we gave that to, say, our pod leads and said, here, go. And that's the way we rolled it out.
So in your research, you mentioned that you went heavy for the Thing, right? And Alien. And you specifically strayed from Dead Space. But given the fact that the creative group was making Dead Space, are you comfortable that you ended up as a spiritual heir to Isaac and Ishimura with what you have for Callisto?
I think, once again, we wanted to be unique and stand on its own, but we're also taking inspiration on stuff that we did too, right? I don't know as a creative person how you can avoid that. And so, we are very comfortable with being a spiritual successor. But once again, we wanted to tell our own story here. We wanted to be a bit evolved. So I talked about that sandbox mechanic stuff. If you get to play the game, you'll see it's very different.
In the beginning, you mentioned that you make a lot of emphasis on the realism, but what's your approach to the suspension of disbelief? Like in this particular instance, we're on an alien planetoid, but the gravity and atmospheric pressure work the same as on Earth, so bullets work the same, etc.
Yes, you got me on the gravity. Yes, that was a subject of discussion for sure. For lots and lots of discussion. It's like, oh, the gravity, what are we gonna do? In the end, we felt it wasn't important enough for the gameplay to take that into account. There are other examples in media. I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Moon, where he's walking around. It's just like he's bouncing around. It's normal. It's like Earth, and of course the moon gravity is 1/4. So we took that. We take some liberties there. Yes.
Hello. Most probably you had many conflicts between gameplay and art, as it often happens in the gameplay-driven games. So did you have many of such situations where you needed to choose whether you're going with the art approach or with the gameplay approach? Or what were the most spectacular such conflicts and how did they resolve?
Everything was perfect. I mean, it's just, no. One of our pillars was design realism. So that speaks to gameplay there. But of course, there's always going to be that push and pull, and it's collaboration. And with people of passion, it's going to be difficult. I mean, everybody really cares about what they care about, and so yes. Like going back to that wood chipper example, that was stressful. I mean, it was just like there was a need there, and it's like, oh my gosh, but it was fun at the same time because it pushed you, right? It pushed the department, and I really love our design group. I do, they're our friends and stuff. So I think when that collaboration happens, you make something really wonderful, and we just need to partner with each other, just talk.
Hello, that was a cool presentation, thanks. And I wanted to ask about the fact that this is coming out on PSVR, on PlayStation 5, and Sony wants developers to develop hybrid PSVR compatible games. And I think that Resident Evil was very successful on VR, and Resident Evil 8 will also have a VR version. So would you consider in the future having your game in VR, especially considering it would really amp up the fear factor?
I would love to do VR. I'm not sure if that's in our plans right now. And one of my first concerns would be performance. So basically rendering the game twice. And not to say that it couldn't happen. I don't think that our team has this specialities of people to actually do that right now. But I certainly against it. I would love to see it in VR.
Yeah, sorry. You mentioned that your game taking like a futuristic setting, but despite that, one of the things that made I think Alien so famous was this reliance on this retro futuristic technology. Have you considered because I don't know, maybe you have considered something like that in your game, like making the technology despite of the futuristic setting more grounded retro-wise?
This is redacted. It's a little bit censored because the game hasn't come out. So I'll say yes. And okay, I think I want to be respectful to our next presenter. So thank you very much, and yeah, hopefully you get to play the game.